I don't see Europe needing any sort of weapon. They're not fighting anything. He knows these weapons are going to Ukraine if they get these weapons, Europeans. And he somehow he confessed that he's concerned about the his concerns of what's going on in terms of casualties. How is that possible that you send more weapons and you are at the same time concerned of what's going on there?
Nima, you're going to go gray trying to imagine rational thinking with Donald Trump's Ukraine policy. It's impossible. It's a mission impossible. Donald Trump, this isn't about national security policy. This isn't about foreign policy. This is about domestic policy. Donald Trump is trying to appease a domestic audience and several domestic audiences at the same time. He has his base who says they're tired of American money being sent off to fund Ukraine. And then he has his political opposition, or what I would say the traitors among us, those who claim to be supportive of Donald Trump, but who actually vehemently oppose any policy that would bring an end to this conflict on terms acceptable to the Russian Federation. And so he has to go through, these very complicated machinations. He doesn't care about the dead because he doesn't know how to count the dead. He just repeats numbers that are given to him by people. If he cared about the dead, then he truly wanted to know what the reality is and understand why reality matters. He lives in a fantasy land where Russia's losing more manpower than Ukraine, where the Ukrainians are losing manpower at a sustainable rate, meaning that Ukraine has the potential of continuing this conflict. Russia, according to his numbers, is not able to sustain this. Therefore, the concept of continuing this war to put pressure on Russia seems to make sense to him. But the fact of the matter is we now know that 1.7 million Ukrainians are dead or missing. I think there's a couple 100,000 of those who could be missing, but they're probably dead. That number is going to go up because if, according to the same leaked data out of the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, 625,000 of those dead / missing are this year alone. That's 90,000 a month. And that number is going up higher because Russia's just dominating. So this means that every month, another 90, soon to be 100,000 Ukrainians are dying or disappearing. Those are big numbers. If Trump cared about Ukraine, he'd say we have to bring this war to an end because those numbers are only going to get worse. Russia's numbers are big, but not that big. Right now it's estimated that, Russia's losing, one dead for every 10, 13, 15 Ukrainian dead. So, the Russian numbers are far less than the Ukrainian numbers. Still big numbers. I mean, I'm not saying Russia's having a cakewalk here. This is hard fighting. This is some of the most high intense combat that's been seen since the Second World War. At least Donald Trump gets that aspect of it right. And he's starting to understand that it's a new kind of war. He spoke the other day about drone warfare and the reality of drone warfare. But, he can't allow himself to be painted into a corner, meaning that he caved into Russia. So he has to say stupid things and do stupid things. This is why the other day he posted on social media about Ukraine had the ability to attack Russia. Nobody ever won a war on the defense. You have to have the ability to attack. He coupled that then with an announcement that the United States, it was reported in the Wall Street Journal, was going to sell 3,000 some odd extended range, attack missiles, or I don't know what the A stands for, to Ukraine. And on the surface of it, you say, well, what? Because wasn't it Donald Trump who realized back in December of 2024 that the Biden administration's green lighting of use of ATACMS missiles for targeting the Russian strategic that brought us to the brink of nuclear war? Trump recognized that. And that's why he said, I won't continue that policy. Now he's doing that policy, just using a different weapon system. But let's parse this out, because that's what he said. He's posturing right now so that nobody can say, you're not supporting Ukraine. He said, no. We're just not paying for it. But NATO's paying for it. Remember those 10 Patriot batteries that they were going to provide the full complement. I mean, I love that term, the full complement. It's so wholesome. It makes you feel really good and safe and secure. And now I guess we're providing with the full complement of ERAM missiles too. But those Patriot batteries will never be delivered to Ukraine. First of all, they have to be produced. You have to get in line. There's a lot of people looking for Patriot batteries and Patriot missiles. Israel used a whole bunch of them, needs replacements. The United States doesn't have any left. We need to beef up our forces. So once we start producing them and we get them to Europe so they can transfer them to Ukraine, we're talking 2027, 2028. There won't be a Ukraine by then. It's not going to last much longer. The ERAM, it was a system conceived in 2023. It didn't exist. In fact, it doesn't exist. I mean, they've spent 2 years developing it. I think it might have passed its last trial, but it's not in serial production yet. That means that if you're building it, you're building one-ofs for testing purposes. They're not designed to be given to Ukraine yet. And yet in 6 weeks, Donald Trump says he'll begin delivery. That means that let's assume, to make that announcement, the system now has passed its final evaluation. The maximum output that the United States will have with everything going full speed is 1,000 missiles a year. That means that to get to what Donald Trump is, we're talking at least 3.5 years down the road before that full complement gets there. But some missiles may be delivered, a handful, a dozen, starting. But then there's the fine print. Ukraine can't use these missiles without America's permission. Only America gets to designate the targets. And if you think Donald Trump is going to allow the United States to designate targets for the ERAM missiles, knowing that in doing so, you close the door on any peace possibility because you become a direct participant in the war, that isn't going to happen. Everything gets pushed off 6 months. I think Donald Trump is hoping that in 6 months, there will be a new reality on the ground, one that compels the Ukrainians to accept the Russian terms without compromise that can bring this war to an end. Otherwise, this war will continue until Russia accomplishes all of its objectives. And unfortunately, to get those objectives, Russia will be called upon to destroy the Ukrainian army. There's 800,000 of them in there today. I think Russia, by the time this is finished, will end up killing another 250, 300,000 Ukrainians. That's just the way this cookie crumbles. That's the way war goes. So, this is the reality. Donald Trump is saying things, but the reality is nothing of substance is going to be delivered. Donald Trump has bigger fish in mind. He has a strategic nuclear treaty he's trying to revive with the Russians. He's trying to come up with, profitable joint enterprises, joint exploration of the Arctic. I think it was Chevron just basically was greenlit to go back into the Russian oil business. Trump said, yeah, we're friendly to that. That's, billions of dollars. And after Chevron will come other American energy giants that'll get back into the Russian market. This is what Donald Trump cares about. He doesn't care about Ukraine. In fact, today, or I think yesterday, he said, what did Ukraine expect going to war with Russia? They got their butts kicked. He recognizes that reality. It's just a political game that's being played right now because there's a tremendous amount of opposition inside the United States, in Europe, and colluding between Europe and the United States to prevent Donald Trump from having better relations with Russia. And unfortunately, these people who oppose better relations with Russia are willing to sacrifice Ukraine to achieve, their outcome. And when I say sacrifice, I mean literally sacrifice Ukraine. They're destroying the genetic pool of Ukraine. Soon they'll be sending 18-year-olds to the front line. And when they do that, that's it. Ukraine's finished as a race because you'll have a bunch of women and you won't have any men left. And that's it.
You said the decision on the part of Ukrainians, but who's going to decide about that? Is that all about Ukraine, or you're talking about Europeans and the establishment in the United States?
Well, I mean, the Europeans and the establishment in the United States believe they're going to be the ones making a decision, but they're not. The only person making the decision is Russia. Russia's in complete control of this narrative here. Russia's not budging. Russia offers cosmetic compromises. But also Russia understands that even the cosmetic compromises they're putting on the table, Ukraine won't accept. And, so now Russia, look at Steve Witkoff in the White House, yesterday with the assembled cabinet saying, Russia has made concessions. Russia's ready to concede. Russia's ready to work with us. Ukraine's not. But he views that as a positive because the Russians are making concessions. So, at the end of the day, it's not going to be the Russians that are going to be called upon to make dramatic. It's going to be the Ukrainians who will be called upon to accept unconditional surrender. And right now, Zelensky is incapable of agreeing to this, which means this conflict will continue. Every day this goes on, it gets worse and worse and worse for the Ukrainians. There's no good news coming out of Ukraine. None.
And unfortunately, I don't know if you saw the interview with Scott Bessent talking about the frozen Russian assets. And he said Europeans can use them as a leverage on Russia. Here is what he said, Scott.
$1 billion that is Russian assets sitting in European banks right now. I know it's frozen, and the EU has said that they'll use the interest on that money to rebuild Ukraine. But shouldn't all of that money go toward rebuilding Ukraine to ensure that Putin doesn't get his hands on that money anymore?
On the frozen Russian assets, I think that's all part of the negotiation with President Putin. So I don't think we should seize them immediately.
I see.
And it is a chip on the table during this big negotiating process, and we will see whether part of that goes to the Ukraine rebuild.
Okay.
How do you see this big negotiating table that he's talking about? What is the big? Is it all about Ukraine, or you think that he's talking about something bigger than that?
Oh no! If he's talking about the potential seizure of Russia's sovereign wealth that was illegally frozen by the West, and they've been illegally skimming off the interest. We're talking about a very small table called Ukraine. Russia's not going to play this game. I mean, Scott Bessent has to understand that Putin's just not going to play that game. So whatever you think you're going to have with Russia ain't going to happen if you seize their money. Sorry, Scott, that's just the way the cookie crumbles. And Europe recognizes that. You just saw, I think the head of the Belgian government say, we're not seizing their money. We can't, because once that happens, it begins this catastrophic chain reaction that ends with the destruction of the Western financial system. And Scott Bessent knows that. He's just playing stupid games. Again, he's one of the guys that stabs Trump in the back, because this is not the kind of advice that's conducive to an outcome that's positive. This is the kind of Scott Bessent is a Russophobic guy who thinks in Cold War mentality. He's not a problem solver. He's not trying to help solve this problem. He's like Marco Rubio, sitting there pretending to be sitting next to Donald Trump and helping Donald Trump, but stabbing Trump in the back when it comes to achieving better relations between the United States and Russia. The notion that Russia's sovereign wealth can be stolen and not create insurmountable problems with Russia is just absurd in the extreme. The good news is the world knows this. The bad news is it creates confusion where there shouldn't be confusion, because we should be talking about the big table. The big table is where we can be talking about strategic arms reduction. We can talk about Arctic, joint Arctic exploration, exploitation. We can talk about the return of the energy giants to Russia. We can talk about investments, lifting of sanctions, normalization of relations, all the good things. But you're not going to get to that big table as long as the United States is holding hostage hundreds of billions of dollars of Russian sovereign wealth.
Do you think that they talk about it, these things, but they're not publicly announcing it?
Well, they can't take the money. I mean, Bessent doesn't even know how he would begin to do that. It's against the law. It's against everything. And when you're talking about banks and financial institutions, this stuff sort of matters, because a lot of it's based upon confidence. The quickest way to lose confidence in the dollar, lose confidence in the Western banking system, is to start seizing sovereign wealth assets. Then nobody will want to deposit their money in Western banks. And that's the end of it. And for countries like Belgium, Luxembourg, and others who have part of their economy is dependent upon banking, it'd be the end of them. So I have to say, there's a couple people when they open their mouths, I listen, but I don't overreact. Keith Kellogg, who cares? Scott Bessent, who cares? Lindsey Graham, who really cares? No, but I mean, there's a number of them. When they speak, you're just like, it doesn't matter, because they're so far removed from reality that their opinion no longer matters.
Russia, Scott, you've been to Russia and you saw what's going on there, the mindset of these people there. Do you think that they really care about how sensitive does Russia feel about America, the United States sending weapons to Ukraine? I want to know that, because in the meeting Putin had with Donald Trump, I don't know if they talk about these things, the intelligence and the weapons that the United States is trying to provide. They may talk about NATO, but it's all about Ukraine. It's not about NATO.
Look, Sergei Lavrov and other Russian diplomats have said it straight up. They know what's going on. They know the United States continues to provide weapons. They know the United States continues to provide intelligence. They understand this. It's just the reality that they're in right now. It doesn't change anything. It doesn't change, what's going on the battlefield isn't impacted by this. It's just a reality. But the Russians have said that there can't be a lasting peace with Ukraine so long as the United States provides intelligence, weapons, etc. That in order to get the peace that Donald Trump claims he wants, the United States will have to stop doing all the things they're doing now. But Russia's been dealing with this for over 3 years now, and they're winning. So from the Russian perspective, they'll just deal with it a little bit longer. Now, that's the Russian government. They're very pragmatic. I'll tell you, the Russian people are furious because our weapons are killing Russian soldiers. Every day there's a mom, a wife, a daughter, a sister who's lost a loved one, and they're being killed by American provided weaponry. And the Russians have a hard time squaring the notion that the United States is trying to pursue peace at the same time providing Ukraine with the resources that enable them to kill Russian soldiers. That doesn't mean Russia's going to quit. It just means there's a lot of bitterness now in the hearts of the Russians. And they don't necessarily buy into the notion that Donald Trump is a good guy. Look, the Russians want peace. They made that point over and over again. But they also said it's peace through victory, meaning that you can't have peace without victory. Victory comes first, then peace. And that's the mindset of the Russian people right now. They want this war to come to an end, but they're not willing to make the concessions that would deny them the victory that's been earned by the blood of the Russian soldiers who've been killed by the American weapons.
Lavrov said that they didn't talk about the meeting between Vladimir Putin and Zelensky during the talks. And what it was, when you look at the United States and the Trump administration, somehow Donald Trump came out saying, so we're done with the talks with Vladimir Putin. Next time we're going to have Zelensky talking to Vladimir Putin. They may invite me if they want me to be there. I would be there. And so when they didn't talk about it, how you can offer that in the aftermath of that meeting?
Well, let's put it this way. Donald Trump came into that meeting with a certain list of expectations. They didn't talk about any of those. They talked about the ones Russia wanted to talk about. But that list still exists. That list still influences, Trump's, policy options. And so it's the equivalent of me saying, okay, Neiman, we're going to meet. And when I meet, we're going to be talking about things. You're going to be meeting with, I'm going to make you meet with McGregor. You're going to meet with him face to face. You and McGregor are going to meet. That's going to happen. And we're going to do this, that, and the other thing. And then you and I get together, and I don't mention McGregor at all. You don't mention McGregor. We don't mention anything. But when the meeting's done, I come out and go, I had a good meeting with Nima. And, I think the next time he's going to be meeting with McGregor. And we're going to, that's because it was on my piece of paper. It was on my agenda. I didn't talk about it. It's still on my agenda. I'm still going to talk about it. But you're going to sit there and go, we didn't talk about McGregor. It didn't come out of my lips. That's what's happening here. Trump wants a meeting with Zelensky, wants Putin to meet with Zelensky. The Russians are like, no. I mean, I guess we could say in theory, but we can't have an agreement with him. He's not a legitimate president. And that really gets under the skin of Trump. You saw that the other day in that thing, bullshit. Hey, they're going to accept it no matter, excuse my language, but the president said it. Why can't I? But yeah, he just lives in a fantasy world. This is where he really needs high quality people around him. I'm not saying that I have all the solutions, but I am working with a group of people that we call the Poughkeepsie Peace Initiative, and we're putting together what we call a civilian engagement team. And we're offering our services to the president because we're saying you're getting the world's worst advice about Russia. Please give us an audience. At least listen to us. Bring in your team, your team A, and we'll bring in team B. And we'll call it the Super Bowl of ideas. And I can bet you at the end of the day, team B trounces team A because your team A has no clue what they're doing. And you're the president who claims he wants peace. I mean, this is how bad it gets. He's just getting horrible advice from people who have an agenda that isn't the president's agenda. And I wish he could see this. He was blind to John Bolton and Mike Pompeo when they sabotaged his efforts to bring about the denuclearization of North Korea. And today, I think he's blind about, Marco Rubio. He's blind about Scott Bessent. He's blind about Keith Kellogg. These people don't want peace with Russia. It's the last thing they want. They're going to sit there and say all the nice things behind it, but then they're going to turn around and they're going to be pushing, these fundamentally flawed narratives, these fact-free narratives. The president deserves better, especially if we, the people, want him to succeed. So we'll see. I don't know if we'll get an audience. I don't know, what's going to happen, but I can damn sure tell you we're going to try because, as you yourself have pointed out, the inconsistencies of the president's policy approach is manifest. It'll drive you insane trying to figure it out.
What I see in the United States that these people are somehow managed to buy time for their agenda, for the agenda of establishment in Ukraine. They did that before during the Russia Gate, but they have managed somehow to come out with some sort of, it's not that much strong in the media, but they have managed Donald Trump so far the way that they want him to be. And it's not just go ahead.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. They're and they did it that first term. Russiagate tied his hands like you wouldn't believe. Guess what? Russiagate's over, man. Not only is it over, it's becoming a criminal offense. People are being arrested. People will be arrested. People are being charged. The people that embrace that narrative are out of power and soon to be out of society. I don't know if I fully endorse this. I'm not a fan of politicized witch hunts. But the point is, the Russophobes have been neutralized. Two, there was no conflict the first term. There's a conflict now. What are you buying time for if you're the Europeans? For Ukraine to get their asses kicked? Okay, Russia's ready to play that game. As I told you, the casualties are unsustainable. 90,000 a month, soon to go up to 100,000 a month for Ukraine. A month. Can't sustain that. So what are you buying time for? It's not as though there's a rainbow, you're going to hit a pot of gold here. No, it's a disaster. It's just a bridge collapsed in a cliff and you're going down into hell. That's the ride they're on. So all they're doing is killing more Ukrainians. And they don't care about that, but they're also bankrupting Europe. I mean, come on, Nima, you're smarter than I am. I know it. That's why I come on your show, because I learn a hell of a lot more from your questions than anybody learns from my answers. You know what's going on in Germany right now. You know the state of their economy. You know the French government's about to collapse, literally. I mean, it may not last the month, and the month's almost over. And when the French government collapses, Europe's already said the next government will, when Macron goes, he may go. They said it'll be the Putinists. The Putinists will be in, Marie Le Pen and all that. Well, there's the end of France. And guess what else is going to happen? AfD is the most popular political party in Germany today, and I think the lady who runs it came out and said, "Yeah, when we win, we're out of the EU. We're done. Finished. Goodbye. Sayonara." That's the end of Europe. If France and Germany drop out of the EU, Europe doesn't exist anymore. Unified Europe. It's finished. It's gone. And then you'll see a fracturing like you've never seen before. So what are you buying time for? People have to understand, the more time you buy, the more you sustain this absolutely insane failed process that's captured Europe since the beginning of 2022, the more you guarantee an outcome which is very good for Russia and very bad for Europe. And it's not good for the United States. I mean, we need stability. I mean, I'm an American who doesn't believe in the European Union. I really don't. I think it was a failed experiment from the get-go. But I'm also an American that says it's in our best interests. You know that I'm sympathetic to the Russian point of view. I believe history's on the right side of Russia. But I ask the Russians this all the time. Is it in your interest to see Europe collapse? Is it in your interest to see NATO fail? And the Russians are like, no, we sort of like stability. We don't want Europe to go away. We don't want NATO to go away. We just want them to leave us alone. Maybe learn to live in peace and harmony. The last thing Russia wants is chaos in Europe. That's not good for Russia. Chaos is bad. And yet this is what the people who are opposing a Russian victory and dragging out this war in Ukraine by playing the delay game with Donald Trump, they're just guaranteeing a really, really bad outcome for Europe, a really bad outcome. The end of the EU, the end of NATO. And this is the scary part because we don't know what's going to happen, but we have some hints. The whole idea of the European Union was to make sure that there were no more, large-scale ground wars in Europe anymore. Well, they failed. We got one going on in Ukraine right now. But you do know that within the NATO alliance, Mark Ritter, it's the strongest alliance. It's never been stronger. I mean, my God, it is so strong. I'm so impressed. We can bench press more than the mayoral candidate of New York City. But that's not saying much since he can only bench press 135 pounds assisted by. So anyways, let's take that out of the way. The point is, within NATO right now, in the center of Europe, you have two mini NATOs showing up. You got one mini NATO that is, I think it's Kosovo, Croatia, and Albania. I think Croatia and Albania have that NATO membership thing going for them. But Kosovo doesn't. It's not a NATO state. So they've created a military alliance, a security framework that's outside of NATO with two NATO members. In opposition to them, we get Hungary, Slovakia, and Serbia, not a NATO member. And they've created an alternative, an opposing military bloc. So when Europe falls apart, and it will, we're going to see wars in Europe. We're going to see wars that are going to be horrific, wars that are going to rival what's going on in Ukraine in terms of death and destruction. Europe's condemning itself to another 100 years of conflict. And the conflict won't be limited to these marginal states. We got Poland right now making some harsh rhetoric against the Banderists. And, if you listen to Naryshkin, the head of the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service, one of Russia's objectives might be to rid itself of the Banderist cancer by somehow having Western Ukraine fall under Polish control. There will be a purging like you haven't seen. There will be a retribution. It will be ugly. But if Poland regains its eastern territories, what are the Germans going to say about Silesia and Pomerania and East Prussia, which they had to give to Poland to compensate for the land that was taken by the Soviet Union? You think the Germans are going to sit there idly and go, yeah, that's all right? No. So now we're looking at, a German-Polish war? Who's going to side with the Poles? The Balts? Who's going to side with the Germans? I don't know. Maybe France, maybe not. Maybe France won't. So now you got a war against France and Germany, although I find that unlikely, but that could happen. The British, they're everywhere causing trouble. They've signed an agreement with Poland. They've extended their nuclear umbrella to Poland. So now if the Germans and the Poles starting to get a fight over Silesia and Pomerania and East Prussia, where is the UK going to come in? And if the UK jumps in, France sort of extended theirs too. So now Germany's going to turn around and say, well, we need nukes, either develop themselves or, hey, Russia, we'd like to talk a little bit. See, this thing, Europe will, what we conceive Europe of being won't be anymore. It's over unless they stop this insanity right now. Stop it right now. I'm not saying the EU deserves to exist. What I'm saying is Europe doesn't, for the betterment of mankind, Europe doesn't need to slip into chaos and anarchy. It's already got so many problems. The immigration problem. I mean, if Germany was invaded today, 16% of the male population said they'd be willing to give their lives in defense of Germany. That's if Germany was invaded, 16%. What happens if Germany follows through on its promise to go to Ukraine? What percentage of the German manhood is going to say, yeah, we're ready to go die in Ukraine? None. Nobody in Europe wants to die in Ukraine. And yet NATO and Europe are crucifying themselves on that cross. Anyways, that's the Russians don't want that. The Russians don't want that kind of instability. Russia likes predictability. Russia likes to know what's going to happen. It's easier to formulate policy that way. It's easier to allocate resources if you have a good idea of what the future is going to be. So the idea that Russia's gloating over the collapse of Europe and the collapse of NATO is just an absurd notion. You know, Russia prefers stability. Russia prefers predictability. And right now we have nothing but instability and unpredictability. My English language is horrible. I apologize.